People say Ward 9 has a rule that isn't written on any chart. If a patient is admitted to the ICU between 2 and 3 in the morning, they do not see sunrise. Most doctors call it coincidence and move on with their shift. But a few know better because between those 2 hours, something happens on that floor that doesn't fit inside any medical textbook. This is the story of the night Dr. Kabir Rao stopped believing it was coincidence. That night, the rain wasn't falling. It was breaking. The old civic hospital sat on a hill outside the city, a crumbling silhouette in the storm, its windows dark, its walls streaked with damp, monitors beeping faintly behind every door like a heartbeat that refused to stop even in a building this tired. People said the third floor's Ward 9 saw more deaths between 2 and 3 a.m. than any other hour of the day combined. Some doctors called it the witching hour and laughed it off in the break room. The ones who actually worked nights there didn't laugh for long. The clock above the ICU's ancient wall read 2:17 a.m. The air smelled of antiseptic, old medicine, and damp concrete. Dr. Kabir Rao sat hunched at the desk, 27 years old, barely 2 months into his residency, deep into an 18-hour shift. A cup of cold tea sat forgotten beside his elbow. Nearby, intern Ananya Bhatt, 25, was fighting to keep her eyes open in a plastic chair. The room was otherwise silent, just the slow, steady beep of a monitor keeping time in the dark. A grinding, metallic sound rolled in from the corridor. The ancient service elevator, groaning like it had jammed somewhere between floors. Ananya's head snapped up. "Sir, does the elevator always sound like that?" Kabir suppressed a tired laugh, though something behind his eyes wasn't entirely amused. "Every night, and if it ever sounds like it's coming up instead of stuck, that means someone's on their way, alive or not." He hadn't even finished the joke when every light on the floor cut out at once. Darkness swallowed the room whole. Only the dim red flicker of the emergency lights remained, throwing crooked shadows across the walls. And then, slow and dragging, the sound of footsteps in the corridor. Each step scraped against the floor like something being pulled rather than walked. A shape stopped just outside the door. "Doctor, be ready. A case is coming." The voice carried no urgency, no panic, just a flat, cold certainty, as if it already knew exactly how the night would end. They turned. In the dim lobby light, a woman in a pale blue uniform mopped the floor without looking up. Then, from somewhere below, a scream tore through the building. "Doctor! Doctor, please! Save my baby!" An elderly woman came sprinting up the stairs, breathless. A 4-day-old infant clutched against her chest. Tears streaked her face. Terror had hollowed her eyes. Behind her, a younger man, the child's father, followed, pale and helpless, clinging to the last thread of hope that something could still be done. Kabir took the infant into his arms, and for one full second, his heart seemed to stop with the child's. The baby wasn't breathing. No cry. No movement in the chest at all. Its eyes stared fixed toward the ceiling, its small body rigid, unnaturally stiff as though carved from wood, and its skin had shifted to a dark, bruised blue-black, as if every trace of oxygen had been pulled out from the inside and left only cold behind. "Something evil has its eye on this child," the grandmother said, voice cracking. "It's the new moon tonight. I told them not to take him outside. Nobody ever listens to me." "That's enough, Ma," the father snapped, voice breaking with every word. "Let the doctor work." Ananya's hands shook as she reached for the infant's wrist, searching for a pulse. Her fingers found only cold. In the corridor, the cleaning woman murmured to herself as she worked. "A baby came just like this last month too, gone before sunrise." Her voice held no fear at all, just the flat familiarity of someone watching a story she'd already seen play out. The ICU's emergency light flickered again. The monitor's beep stuttered, stopped, then screamed back to life, faster and louder than before. "NICU now!" Kabir shouted, forcing down his own rising panic. As he lifted the infant onto the stretcher, an icy breath seemed to pass just behind his shoulder, close enough to raise every hair on his neck. He didn't turn to look. The moment the baby was connected to the monitor, Jagged green lines shuddered across the screen. Saturation 63%. The machine read aloud in its flat tone. Kabir's throat went dry. Push oxygen. Now. They fitted the mask, increased the flow rate, adjusted every line they had, and the number on the screen didn't move. Like the machine itself had already given up. "Sir," Ananya said, voice shaking. "What's happening? Why isn't there any response?" Outside, lightning cracked hard enough to rattle the window panes. Rain hammered the glass in a sudden, furious rhythm. The room, despite the air conditioning being off, dropped several degrees in the span of a breath, the kind of cold that has nothing to do with weather. Kabir pressed gently on the infant's tiny chest. "Come on. Breathe. Breathe." Nothing. No movement, no cry, no give in the unnaturally rigid little body. Ananya's eyes drifted to the glass partition and stopped cold. The cleaning woman stood just outside, watching through the window without blinking, eyes locked on the child as though waiting for something, or someone. "That old woman might be right," Ananya whispered. "Something's here for this baby, and it isn't leaving without him." Kabir grabbed a syringe for an emergency blood draw, hands trembling as he filled it. The syringe darkened as it filled, and every face in the room drained of color to match it. The blood wasn't red. It was black, unnaturally thick, viscous, heavy, closer to tar or spoiled syrup than anything that should move through human veins. Ananya's hands shook so badly the test tube slipped and shattered on the floor, the black fluid spreading out except it didn't spread. It stopped where it landed, thickening instantly into something closer to congealed oil, as though it had already decided where it wanted to stay. Nobody in the room spoke. Nobody needed to. Whatever was happening to this child had already stopped being medicine. Desperate for anything that might explain it, Kabir left Ananya with the child and went looking for the hospital's old records room. A place he'd only ever heard mentioned by senior staff, half joking, half serious, as somewhere you don't go alone at night. He went alone anyway. The archive was a narrow, forgotten room behind the administration office, filled with decades of yellowing charts nobody had digitized. It took him almost 20 minutes of searching by flashlight before he found a slim ledger. Its spine cracked, labeled only Ward 9, Incident Log. The first entry was dated 1996. Every single incident logged inside had occurred between 2 and 3 a.m. Every one involved an infant. Everyone, according to the attending physician's shorthand notes, had shown identical symptoms. Rigid limbs, blue-black discoloration, unresponsive vitals, and blood samples described, in a doctor's own unsteady handwriting, as abnormally dark, resistant to normal clotting behavior. At the bottom of the final page, someone had scrawled a single line that wasn't part of any official format. "It only takes them if the room lets it in. Never seal the 9th door." Kabir didn't understand what that meant yet. He would within the hour. He brought the ledger back to Ananya, and together, in the brief lull while the infant's condition held steady worse, but not yet gone, they read through decades of near-identical entries. The pattern was undeniable. Every incident fell on a night with a new moon. Every incident happened in Ward 9 specifically, never any other ward in the building. And every incident had been quietly closed out. No investigation, no public record, no acknowledgement beyond a single line in a ledger nobody but senior night staff even knew existed. "This isn't a coincidence anymore," Ananya said. "This is a pattern somebody's been covering up for decades." "There has to be a reason it's this room," Kabir said. "Ward 9 specifically. Not 8, not 10. He flipped further back in the ledger and found what he was looking for. A hand-drawn floor plan from the hospital's original construction, decades before it was ever a hospital at all. The building had originally been something else. A private sanatorium, shut down after an outbreak the official record blamed on unsanitary conditions. A margin note, written in a different, older hand, told a different story. The sanatorium's founding physician had allegedly performed unauthorized experiments on newborns admitted overnight, chasing some theory about extending infant survival rates through methods the note refused to describe in detail. The experiments had ended when the physician himself was found dead in the ward, in the room that was now Decades later, Ward 9's ICU, at approximately 2:40 in the morning. Back in the ICU, the grandmother sat rigid beside her grandson's stretcher, murmuring prayers under her breath, refusing to look away from the monitor even as her son begged her to rest. "You don't believe me," she said quietly, to no one and everyone. "But I've buried enough children in my life to know what an unnatural death looks like. This isn't sickness. Sickness doesn't turn a child's blood black." "Ma, please. I'm not asking you to believe me," she said. "I'm asking the doctor to hurry, before whatever wants this child decides it's tired of waiting." Kabir crouched beside her. "Do you know anything about this hospital? Anything strange, from before, that you've heard?" She was quiet for a long moment. "My mother used to say never let a newborn stay past 2 a.m. on this hill. She never explained why. I always thought it was superstition." Her voice cracked. "I didn't listen either." Ananya's meter, a small ambient thermometer she'd grabbed on a hunch, spiked hard near the doorway. The temperature in the room had dropped again, sharply, the kind of cold that fogged breath even indoors. The monitor's beep stuttered, held, then flatlined for one full second before jolting back to a frantic, irregular rhythm. While Ananya stayed with the family, Kabir went looking for the hospital's oldest staff member still on record, a retired night nurse, now working administration during the day, who'd been at this hospital longer than anyone alive. He found her number in the emergency contact sheet and called, desperate, at nearly 2:50 in the morning. She answered on the second ring, as if she'd been waiting for the call for years. "Ward 9, she said, before he'd even finished explaining. "New moon, black blood. I know exactly what's happening. Then tell me how to stop it. There's a drawer in the old morgue registry, sealed, never opened since I started here 40 years ago. Inside it is the founding physician's personal journal. If the ledger led you this far, that journal is the only thing that might tell you what he actually did in that room, and whether it can be undone. Why hasn't anyone opened it before? Because the one time someone tried," she said. "The ward lost 3 patients in a single hour. Nobody's touched it since." Kabir hung up, and against every instinct telling him to wait for daylight, went looking for the drawer. The morgue registry room was colder than anywhere else in the building, and Kabir understood, standing in it, that the cold had nothing to do with refrigeration units. The sealed drawer sat exactly where the nurse described, welded shut decades ago, a thin layer of rust the only thing left holding it closed. It took 3 hard pulls before it finally gave. Inside, a leather journal, dated to the sanatorium's final year of operation. The founding physician's handwriting grew steadily more erratic across the pages, describing a ritual meant to borrow vitality from the newly born, that the dying might inherit their years. He'd convinced himself that infants, closest to the boundary between worlds, made the easiest conduits for whatever force he was trying to bind to the building. The final entries described the ritual's failure, the force he tried to control refusing to be released once it was invoked, choosing instead to remain bound to the room itself, feeding on that same narrow hour every time a newborn crossed its threshold, whether the physician wanted it to or not. The last page held a single incomplete diagram, a containment circle half-finished, missing whatever final piece would have sealed it. Kabir sprinted back to the ICU with the journal, meeting Ananya's eyes across the room. 2:58 a.m., the clock read, and the infant's monitor was screaming a rhythm too fast and too erratic to be survivable much longer. "I found it," he said, breathless. "There's a way to contain it, maybe. It's not finished. The original physician never completed it." "Then how do we finish something we don't understand?" Ananya asked. "We don't have a choice." Kabir looked at the grandmother, at the father, at the shaking readout on the monitor. "We have 2 minutes. He sketched the incomplete circle from the journal onto a sheet of paper, comparing it frantically against the sanatorium's original floor plan, and found, at last, the missing element. The ritual required a physical boundary drawn not around the child, but around the room's original doorway, the same threshold the founding physician had died in front of. "Ananya, help me move the stretcher. Now." Together, they wheeled the stretcher to the exact threshold marked in the century-old floor plan, ignoring every protocol either of them had ever been trained to follow. Kabir drew the missing portion of the containment circle in chalk borrowed from a supply closet, his hands unsteady, the temperature around them dropping further with every line completed. "Sir, the monitor." "I know," he said without looking up. "Just a few more seconds." At 3 a.m. exactly, the circle closed. The room went utterly, completely silent, the kind of silence that feels heavier than any sound. The emergency lights guttered once, twice, then steadied. The freezing air seemed to exhale, all at once, like something enormous letting go of a held breath. The infant's monitor jolted, hesitated, and then began beeping in a slow, steady, entirely normal rhythm. Saturation, 74%. Rising. The child began to cry. A real, ordinary, furious newborn cry, the most beautiful sound anyone in that room had heard all night. The grandmother collapsed into her son's arms, sobbing with relief instead of grief for the first time in hours. But Kabir's relief lasted only seconds. Ananya, staring at the monitor beside the door, the same monitor tracking a different, older patient 2 beds down, went pale. The elderly man in bed 6, admitted hours earlier for an unrelated cardiac event, had flatlined at exactly 3 a.m., the same second the child's heartbeat steadied. The ritual hadn't ended the pattern. They had redirected it. "Sir," Ananya whispered, "I think it just took someone else instead." Kabir returned to the sealed drawer's journal with new, desperate urgency, searching the final pages for anything he might have missed. He found it, a single line, added almost as an afterthought, ink noticeably different from the rest, as though written much later than everything around it. "The circle does not banish. It only chooses who pays." The physician, it seemed, had understood this before his death, and had chosen, in his final entry, to stop trying to close the circle at all, accepting instead that the ritual could only ever redirect the hour's toll, never end it. Kabir sat with that knowledge in silence, the newborn's healthy cry still audible down the hall, an old man's death only 2 beds away. He had saved one patient. He had not saved the ward. By morning, hospital administration arrived to find an unexplained cardiac death, a miraculous infant recovery, and a resident physician they weren't sure whether to praise or investigate. Kabir gave a report that included exactly none of what he'd actually done. The chalk circle scrubbed from the floor before the day shift arrived, the sealed drawer welded shut again by a maintenance worker paid, quietly, not to ask questions. The ledger stayed in the archive. The rule stayed unspoken. Ward 9's night shift continued, as it always had, 1 doctor and 1 intern at a time, none of them fully told what waited for them between 2 and 3 in the morning. Weeks later, off shift, Ananya finally asked the question she hadn't been able to shake. "If it only redirects the death," she said, "then every time we save someone in that window, someone else in the hospital pays for it. Doesn't that mean we're not actually stopping anything?" Kabir didn't have a clean answer for her. "Maybe all we can ever do in that room is choose who it takes. I don't know if that makes us doctors or something else entirely." "Then why didn't you tell anyone? The board, the family in bed 6, anyone?" "Because there's nothing anyone could have done with the truth," he said, "except be afraid every single night the way we are now. At least this way, only 2 of us have to carry it." 6 months later, a new intern completed her first orientation walk through the 3rd floor, following the ordinary hospital tour every new hire received. At Ward 9's door, her senior resident paused, almost as an afterthought. "One thing," he said, "if a patient's admitted to the ICU here between 2 and 3 in the morning, just page one of us immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself. Understand?" "Why? Is there some protocol I'm missing?" He didn't answer right away. Down the hall, the ancient service elevator groaned faintly, metal grinding against metal, as though something, somewhere below, had just begun its slow climb up. "You'll understand," he said. "Just page us. If this story kept you up, subscribe. We're taking you back to Ward 9 soon. If your family has a hospital story that still gives you chills, tell us in the comments. It might be our next case file.